Hey, Brian, why is Jeff Bezos richer than me?
There's a lot of obvious answers, but I assume you don't want the obvious answer, so I don't have anything else.
Because of economic inequality. That's why.
So stupid. and I don't even mean that in like it's stupid, but the stupidity of the joke is what makes the joke a good joke. Like a lot of dad jokes qualify as that. It's stupid, and that's exactly why it's good. This was stupid, and its stupidity made it a bad joke because it was that stupid. So I give that joke an F. I understand what you were doing. It tied into the episode and all that, but yeah, poor effort by you, Zach.
Excellent. I appreciate the feedback. So what are we doing here today? What are we getting into?
Okay, so we're not getting quite into economic inequality specifically, but at least as far as the whole episode, but that will probably come up at some point. Because on a broader sense, we are doing an episode that is oh so wonderful to discuss, especially for anyone who is politically sensitive, politically charged, gets politically heated, have they're stuck in their ideologies, and they have their cult-like followings when it comes to politics and all that. This is one of those talking points and those topics that really get everybody going. And we're going to dive into today, and that is equality versus equity, equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity, however you want to frame it. That's the back and forth that usually you see one side of the political aisle is on one side of it, and then the other side does the other one, and then they fight back and forth. We're not really going to necessarily take one side versus the other in terms of like I represent one side of it and Zach represents the other, and we're going to have a debate about it. We're going to mention both sides and what they say, but we're kind of just going to analyze it from more of a in-the-middle, neutral perspective, as we try to do it most of the time anyway. We're going to do that again, but yep, I guess a warning in advance for anyone who doesn't like these topics because certain things that are said you automatically just are disgusted by, no matter how valid or correct they may be. Discretion advised, because here we go.
Yeah, I'm going to draw a line in the sand here with this next comment I'm going to make. I'm going to share a little story with you guys because I just thought of it. It really fits with the episode, in my opinion. I'm in the car with my wife and kids, and we're driving down this place in the city I live in, and I really hate going on this one particular road, and you'll know why in a second, because what I'm about to tell you happens all the time. But I'm driving on this road, and I get unlucky enough to hit a red light, and there's this guy, and he's standing on the side of the street. He's a homeless guy, and he's yelling at me, the driver of my vehicle, and because there's no other vehicles around me at the moment, a couple more are coming down the road, he's yelling at me, "Change, man, dollars, coins, whatever you got, let me get something. I'm starving here. I'm hungry." I'm thinking to myself, because at the moment we were actually headed to a restaurant. I was thinking to myself, yeah, we're actually hungry too. And guess what we're going to go do? We're going to go to a restaurant. We're going to go spend our hard-earned money in order to buy ourselves some food. But instead, you want my hard-earned money to buy you some food.
Right.
So it gave me opportunity to talk to my kids about the fact that they are my responsibility. My kids are my responsibility to pay for, to make sure they have food and all that. But this guy on the side of the street yelling at me right now, he's not my responsibility at all. And it's interesting because I don't think that someone who is, and I looked at this guy and he was, I can't peg his age exactly. I would probably say either, low 50s, late 40s-ish. So this guy who's obviously lived a long life, especially compared to people in the past, but he's middle-aged, lived a long life, whatever. He nothing to show for himself. Is that my fault? Is it someone else's fault? Was his opportunity stripped away from him? Or did he make bad decisions that's led him to where he is? This whole idea of equality of outcome is really, really ridiculous. I'm not the first person to say this. I certainly won't be the last. But the idea of whatever I'm eating for dinner is what he should be able to eat for dinner as well, when he's not putting forth no effort at all to change his life, and that is evident by what I can clearly see in front of me, that speaks volumes to me. What do you think of that story, Brad, now that we have half our audience gone?
Already, right off the bat. That whole giving to the homeless thing is another one of those examples of, I guess, possibly emotional appeal, emotional manipulation, lack of nuance, all these different things where if you are somebody who decides not to give money to a homeless person, somebody else could see that and automatically judge you harshly, judge you negatively, using whatever words they want to use to make that determination, without realizing or even considering some of the things that you just said. we don't know the person's that person's backstory. Obviously, there are other people who got or in a rough, just having a rough spot. Certain things happen that are out of their control, that weren't their fault. They're trying to get back on their feet. They're making an honest effort, so on and so forth. There are those people. There are also the people who are either made their own bed and kind of need to accept the consequences for it, or even just are lazy and know that this has worked forever, so why do I need to get a job or do anything and earn the money when I can just stand on a corner and get enough money every day consistently and then some to feed me 3 times a day or 2 times a day, whatever, and I'm good. And then I have a place I can sleep. I'm good to go. There's no way to know in that half a second or that minute and a half or however long it is you interact with that homeless person to know which one is which and what category they fall under. And you just have to just kind of make the decision anyway. And then you have to decide at that point, which one would you rather be wrong about? Would you rather be wrong about, this guy's probably just having is having some bad luck, and it turns out he's lazy, and now you're wrong, and you gave the guy money and enabling his laziness, or you assume the guy's lazy and he's actually having bad luck, and now you are kicking a guy when he's down. Either way, you're going to be wrong. Sometimes you have to determine which one is which, but it's not as simple as just to see that one person walk right past another homeless guy and say, "You're a selfish bastard," things like that. So it's I don't like the way that those things are analyzed, because it seems to me it's more just if I explain it, if I talk about it, all I'm doing and say you got to give a person their money, things money that you have, you got to give it to them, however they want to say it. It's more just virtue signaling. Like I'm boasting about how good I am, even though I'm not actually doing it at the moment. Just saying that I would do it or that I have done it is just to make myself look good more than anything else. And anytime anyone's doing that for virtue signaling, I immediately turn it off. The last thing I'll say, the last thing about that is the first point you made about that was excellent, because you have your own money that you're using to pay for yourself, your wife, and your kids. And the narrative is supposed to be, forget about giving it to them and yourself, give it to this guy, otherwise you're the bad guy. That's weird. That's a weird... They don't frame it that way, but that's a weird message to give across.
It is. I want to offer another perspective on this conversation. He's kind of goes in line with what you're saying there, Brian, and it's... I just had a brain fart. I had it there and it's gone. Well, either way, I hope that he was able to get himself a dinner. I will make a point that's unrelated to what I was trying to think of. I can't remember. I'll let you know if I can think of it. And that is, when we give money to these homeless people in these cases, or we're giving people these opportunities, we don't know that they're using it for the best reasons. I just remember what I wanted to say. What I wanted to talk about is the perspective of making a short-term decision versus a long-term decision. Not just for you, but the person you're giving it to. So what happens when you make that analysis you just mentioned, Brian? Are you going to look at it as someone's down on the luck, they just need a little bit of help, or someone has deliberately put themselves in this position? My perspective on this is actually it doesn't matter, because a lot of times we look at charity as this necessary thing that we need in order to lift people up, to get them back on their feet. But that's not... I would love to see the statistics on this. My own perspective is obviously skewed. It's very anecdotal, subjective, but my perspective is most of the time when I've seen someone receive help, it has actually done the opposite of help them. It has made the situation worse for them and for everyone else around. If we take, for example, a lot of the big cities and the homeless populations, they throw millions and millions of dollars at these homeless problems with encampments and programs and policing and all the rest, and the homeless population has not decreased at all. It's actually grown. It's actually grown into a bigger problem as a result of all this money. How does that make any sense? When you give somebody money on the side of the road and you're thinking to yourself in the short term, this person is claiming that they're hungry. They may be, they may not be. I don't know that. I can't read their mind. But they're claiming that they're hungry, so I'm going to give them money. It lets me feel morally superior for right now above all my peers, the people who didn't give them money. Now I can say, oh yeah, I'm a great person, I gave them money. But you're actually being very short-sighted. You're not thinking about the fact that it's very likely the reason they're on the street was their own doing, more than likely drugs, as it is in most places. And that money you gave them probably will not be going towards a salad. It will be going towards something else that they can ingest through their nose. So these are the things you have to be aware of, and the kind of perspective shift. I would say that it's better, even if someone wants food, even if someone is hungry, to give them money is just to extend their suffering. Okay, and that might sound ridiculous, but hear me out. If you are starving and you're really starving, and your biggest motivation is to not be starving anymore, you're going to find the path of least resistance to accomplish that. Okay? And sometimes, what right now the incentive structure is that the path of least resistance is begging the public or going on welfare systems. Well, what if the path of least resistance was just getting a job? What if we made those other things more difficult and less accessible, and the path of getting a job and providing to society a more accessible route? These people, get them off the street and get them into a job. They can feed they can feed themselves. You're encouraging self-resilience, self-reliance, and that's something we're not doing right now.
Well, that goes to one of the points I was making. This isn't the point of the episode, but one of the points I was making is a lot of the homeless narrative that you hear from people is they say that it's about focusing on what's best for the homeless people, but what they actually mean in many cases is it's virtually something by them. In the case of the millions of dollars of big cities putting into homeless problem, a lot of times what that is just the politician who's doing it, the mayor or the governor, patting themselves on the back saying, "You see how wonderful I am? I put all this money into helping homeless," and now they can use it as a stat and say, I contributed millions of dollars to helping feed the homeless." And that sounds great. It's one of those easy political selling points. Feeding the homeless, money, this amount of money to feeding the homeless. It's great. But whether or not you solve the problem doesn't really matter at that point. It's all about making yourself look good. In the case of an individual person, having it, when they say, either they say they have done it in the past, they always do, they always will, or they give some kind of emotionally charged explanation as to why you have to do that. That most of the time is about them, not about the homeless person. It's about them showing you how virtuous they are, how moral they are, how more superior they are to you, how superior they are to you, and not just morally, in all kinds of ways, and how they're basically better than you. And this is their way of demonstrating it. So it's
a very frequent topic. The reason I brought up my perspective is I just want to show that depending on how you look at it, that is actually the opposite of the truth. I mean, you thinking yourself as a good person is only because you're thinking in the short term, not the long term. I want to take a moment just to say, obviously we're like 10 minutes, whatever, into the episode, more than 10 minutes, but what is equality? What is equity? For anyone who doesn't know or understand it, equality, in the way that at least I view it, in the way that I've come to understand it, is that we all have a fair shot at life here in America. We all have certain things that are kind of put in place to elevate us or to help us, and that is what our equal shot is. Okay, I think when it comes to equality specifically, actually, let me explain what equity is real quick. Equity is just everyone gets the same outcome. For anyone who doesn't understand that, anyway, back to equality. I think one of the misconceptions about equality is when people say that everyone gets a fair shot, they just leave it right there. Well, let me explain something here. I've told you guys, if you guys have been here for any time, I live in Florida, right? I do not have the same shot at working at a restaurant in Texas as a guy who works in Texas. I don't have the same shot to get that job. He's there, he's local, he's able to apply in person or talk to the people in person. We don't have the same shot, and it's not equal in our chances to get it. Okay? Equality has to be something that is man-made and manufactured, because in reality, in nature, equality isn't even a thing. Look at nature. There's no equality of the squirrels. There's no equality of the trees that are growing in a forest. Every single one of them is different. They're having to deal with different circumstances, different climates, whatever else. And in reality, that's how we are as human beings. It is only through our governmental systems that we have anything close to equality. But even that should be something we should be very grateful for, not something that we should look at as this isn't nearly enough. And I think that's part of the problem. That's why I'm talking about this today, but that's part of the problem. So many people are pushing for more equity, more equality in things that it would not naturally occur, and in things that really make no sense when you look at it.
Yeah, one of the problems with this conversation, which I'm sure I'll get into at some point later on, is misusing of the words, possibly unintentionally, but possibly not. The whole equality word, it's another thing, just like we mentioned with the whole homeless thing. It's another way for people who use that word to sound virtuous, or even just present themselves an ideal scenario in the world where they say, I'm all about equality. And then not realizing how difficult, if not impossible, depending on the situation, it is to actually achieve equality. Now, maybe that's the goal. Maybe it's one of those things where, a lot of times, I mentioned this before, a lot of times people don't want problems fixed, they just want to complain about them. Maybe equality is one of those things for that person. They continue to complain about equality, knowing that they'll never get it, knowing that they continue to complain about it, and then complaining about it is the point. Maybe that's the idea. But the words get used interchangeably, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not, but either way, it muddies the water. Because a lot of times what you see is one side of a conversation will be screaming for equality, but what they're actually asking for is equity. And the reason why that's relevant is because their version of equality is actually equity, so what they're calling equality is actually equity. The other side hears this person say that, they recognize it as equity, so they reject it. But in the other person's mind, that person is rejecting equality. But they're not rejecting equality. They're rejecting what you call equality. They're rejecting equity. So then all you have to do is say, well, I want equality. You don't, because you're rejecting my idea. It's actually, that's not how it's happening. You don't want equality. You want equity. You're just calling it equality and then attacking the other person for criticizing it. Many years ago now, I had a conversation with somebody that I've told Zach about many times. It started unrelated to equality and equity. It started because of a police interaction with a black individual, of course. And the conversation went to a lot of different paths from there. Of course, Trump came up and COVID and all this other stuff. And at one point during the conversation, I said to the girl who was yelling at me, do you want equality or do you want equity? Because those are two different things. And her response to me was, explain. So she didn't even know that there was a difference between the two. Meanwhile, she's lecturing me and yelling at me and doing all this stuff. So right there, she's not alone in that. Right there is a potential problem with this whole thing. Because people assume the two words mean the same thing, or that when you say one, you can mean the other. They're interchangeable, it's not a big deal. There is a difference, it's a significant difference, and you have to separate the two and then figure out which one you actually want. Even if it's impossible, which one do you want? Which one makes more sense? Which one is more practical? Because that, I got a feeling, you are going to agree with the side you're attacking way more than you realize on this topic.
Mm-hmm. I like the example of obviously you told me about this before, the woman with the lack of understanding in this topic. I think it happens a lot for a lot of people, is that, we hear about these terms, and a lot of times, especially depending on where you're hearing about these terms, it can be painted in such a way that it doesn't seem as fantastical as it actually is. Equality of outcome is extremely hard to do. It's extremely hard. I would even argue it's impossible to do. You can have two twins grow up side by side, and they're not going to have equal lives. Even in childhood, they're not going to have equal lives before they even leave the house. That's just not the way the world works. And I get it, because on one end you see something that seems unfair, and you want to correct it. And people yell equity is what's necessary in order to fix these inequality, these issues that exist. This is why things like DEI exist. This is why affirmative action exists. These things exist because they want to level the playing field, as they would say. But I again, going back to, I haven't really talked about this too much today, but we have a history in this country of there actually being inequality, in the sense that some people would be rejected based on things that they could not control, things outside of themselves, like their race, for example. And we don't live in that country anymore. There is not systemic racism stopping you from getting a job. Things are very, very much based on merit. We live in a meritocracy. It matters how much effort you put in. And I'm not someone who's rich, so I understand that there's a sense of envy that you can feel towards those who have a lot in their lives, who have done something more than you have, or who have gotten lucky. And let's not forget, Brian, that luck is definitely a part of the outcome in a lot of situations. I go back to the example of the guy applying for a job in Texas, and I'm applying for that same job. I might get lucky and get the job even though he doesn't, even though he's local, because maybe they overlooked that part, or maybe something else on my application was better, so I just happened to get lucky over him. And luck does play a factor. I don't think that the focus, this episode, of course, I can just spend the entire episode complaining about all the idiots who think that everything should be equal, but I really want to look at practical solutions here. Some of the practical solutions I could easily suggest is, don't be so reliant on a fair shot as much as what can you do to hedge your bets, I guess. Imagine a gambling scenario. How can you hedge your bets? What can you do to make a safer bets in life? A lot of people who are really wealthy will tell you that risk is what they had to take on a lot of risk in order to get to where they are. And that's true to a degree, but it doesn't always have to be risky for you to be able to live a prosperous life, whatever that means, whether it's financial or otherwise. It's a matter of, are you willing to put in the effort and be smart about the decision, the choices and the risks that you do take? I think that one of the great things about our country, for example, is that we have the opportunity to live in a significantly better way than most humans have in history. Okay? You can have a modest income at a regular job, for example, and you can afford a very nice house in a comfortable, safe place with food in your belly every single night. That wasn't the case for all of history. And it's because of the country and the opportunities that we have that we can do this. A lot of people fall short of that, but that's not due to a systemic issue in the country. It's due to personal decision-making. There's a lot of that as an issue. I mean, this whole podcast we do, Brian, we talk about it all the time. A lot of decision-making, a lot of perspective issues that people have that are causing a lot of people to fall short. So I want to give that as maybe some encouraging advice. Take the reins, if you will. Take the reins on your own life. Kind of hedge your bets. Make proper, smart decisions, and you can get to the outcomes that you want. I'll let you respond, but I want to talk about stuff like minimum wage. So I think minimum wage is another great example of where this argument comes in.
Oh, okay. Me now.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Back to you, Brian.
Okay. I thought you said you were going to talk about it. I thought you were going to talk about it. No problem. So what's happening, what you just talked about, besides what I said before, how a lot of times people don't want the problem fixed, they want to complain about it, you're kind of seeing that with the whole inequality thing. Because for years and years and years throughout history, there was actual inequality. In any definition of the word, there was actual inequality. A lot of that has been alleviated, but the complaint is still going on about that same type of inequality. And not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it is done for convenience. It is a built-in excuse for things not going their way, or it is a way to get stuff that they didn't earn, that they didn't necessarily work for or deserve or anything like that, because I'm a victim of something. But to do that, you have to kind of move the goalposts, which is kind of what has happened here, to what standard is met for inequality or equality. Because in history, equality standard was basically just along the lines of like, don't deny somebody a job opportunity because of their race. You can deny them for other reasons, like they don't have the qualifications, they don't have, they're missing an arm and they need 2 arms for the job. They're too old for the job. They don't live in the correct state, as you said earlier. A lot of different things where it actually would make sense that they're not qualified for the job. But race is not one. Obviously, it's not just race. But we'll use race as an example. If you deny someone for that because of race, that's not equality, because you're not giving everyone an equal opportunity to get the job regardless of race. But now that, even though there are individual situations, I'm sure, where, some small town store or even a big town, where there's individual business owners or companies that have racial agendas. I'm sure that's the case. But in general, through laws and everything, that whole racial inequality thing has gone away. So what is the new way to claim there's inequality? And to do that, if you want to keep the narrative going, you got to find something else. You can't just say, I guess you can say people are just not getting hired because people are getting denied jobs because of their race. And either not have to back it up or use the individual examples that I'm sure exist in this country and pretend that that's the norm and, exaggerate it. Or they just change what equality means. It's no longer just about, about not hiring someone because of their race. Now it's things like how many people are in a certain role at the company, how many people are the CEO of the company or the head coach of the football team. Instead of just getting a job with the football team, now it's who's in the big role. And it's not just, it has to match the percentage of the people in the population who are that race. Now it somehow has to be 50-50, as if the math is going to math the entire time, and we're going to have enough people to make that work throughout the entire job industry. Even if there are certain industries that certain races pursue and other races don't pursue for whatever reason. So there's just not as much of a pool to pull from. Despite all those things, they just change these narratives to what equality means, change the definition, to again ensure that it doesn't get met so they can complain about it. And you see that all the time. But what all this boils down to is it's very important to understand what the actual difference is between equality and equity. Not picking and choosing which words you use for the purpose of a political conversation. I have an example that I have used before, including to this person I talked about earlier, to describe equality versus equity, a simple way you can get into it. But we'll put it back to you for now, Zach.
Okay. I want to. You have an example. I have an example. We all have examples, right? I want to share
All two of us.
something I heard. All two of us. I want to share something I heard. It was basically I don't remember the exact context, but this African American woman or this whatever. I think she was an African American woman. She gets on this board of directors, and she makes a comment that 89% of the board of directors are old white men. And you'll hear this a lot if you pay attention to any of these type of things. Always the old white men, and that is the proof of inequality, and not no one's clearly getting the opportunity to get into those roles. Again, I think you mentioned a very important thing, Brian, which is what are the interests of different people. But I'll take it a step further than that. It's also what are the capabilities of certain people. Just race isn't necessarily the defining factor. Or sorry, let me correct myself here. Race is not the defining factor in regards to your ability to do something, but there is obviously a correlation between what races decide to do with their time, what they decide to invest their time in. And there's a reason why we see the certain results that we do in the financial sector, for example, where board of directors or something, why it's a bunch of old white men. Well, these are old white men who've probably been investing since they were a lot younger, who have worked their careers in order to get to where they are. Is it fair? Is it fair to the other white people who didn't get it? That's the question that you're not asking yourself. It's only the fact that it happens to be white people in the role that it becomes an issue. And I don't know. You see this a lot, and it's very irritating. And I'll say one more thing about this is what they're doing is they're using equity as a basis for inequality. Okay, they're seeing that the outcome doesn't match what they want it to match, and therefore equality doesn't exist. Well, that's not how it works, okay? You can say that one person can win a competition, a NASCAR competition, whatever. One person can win a race. That doesn't mean that everyone didn't have an equal shot at winning the race. You're just looking at the result and saying, "Oh, a white man won the race?" Of course, because no black people had the opportunity to win the race. No, that's not true. You're just looking at it in such a narrow way that you're not seeing the bigger picture and seeing that the person who won for a reason.
Yeah, even if they go further beyond that and say, well, no black person had a chance to win because no black person was in the race. So therefore, there's racial inequality there. Not realizing that you have to qualify for the race, I believe. I'm not a huge NASCAR person. And to do that, it's an objective measurement. You qualify based on your lap or your time and all that. And there's not really it's not like there's a judge deciding, I like you as a driver, I don't like you, so you're going to get in. It's just who had the best times, who had the best scores. And the race of the driver is irrelevant. But when it's convenient, that narrative gets pushed. Because another thing that can happen is, let's go away from race now. If we had a board of directors that was 50% white, 50% black, but they're 85% men, a lot of those same people who complain about racial inequality will just now say, oh, well, now, of course, it's 85% men. It's sexist. Mm-hmm. And then if it's 50%, then somehow it's 25% black men, 25% black women, 25% white men, 25% white women. It's, well, where are the gay people? So a lot of this complaint about inequality, as I've said, is a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that they complain that it doesn't happen, that there's no inequality. It's impossible to reach equality Not just because you don't define it in a way that is easily measured, but because even if you did, because of other factors, it's impossible to reach that number anyway, regardless of how you think equality is. But it's bound to not succeed. You're bound to not reach equality, and you continue to say, see, there's no equality, there's no equality, no equality, and then you can decide who the victims are of that, which can be you, or it can just be whatever group you're trying to advocate for whatever reason you're doing that. So it's just an endless cycle that can really just not go away completely, but can kind of fade away into the background if we kind of have a better understanding of what the equality is, what equity is, what the differences are between the two, and why equality specifically is really impossible to reach no matter how much we'd like to think otherwise.
Yep. And really what you're talking about is a cycle of unhappiness, because you're never going to be happy because it's never going to be enough. It's always going to be pushing the next envelope. We've talked about this in the past. But there's a cycle of happiness, and that is the segments we do on every one of our podcast episodes, guys. Today, we have another one for you, and we'll be right back, okay?
Welcome back, folks, to Things That Piss Me Off But Shouldn't. If up until now, I never sounded like the old man yelling at his kids to get off his lawn, if I hadn't sounded like that before, I'm going to sound like that right now. There's no way that you can't. And if you don't think I sound like that after this, then no matter what I say, you're not going to think that, because this is like the litmus test. Because my complaint today is something I have complained about before, and something Zach has complained about before, but not in this segment. So let's make it an official part of our segment. And that is people who don't use turn signals. Why? Do you know how much effort it takes to use a turn signal? Actually, let me change the question. Do you know how little effort it takes to use a turn signal? Your hand is already there. It's probably just a thumb or a pinky or whatever. Depending on where your hand is on the wheel, your hand doesn't even have to move from the spot on the wheel. All you gotta do is just flick your finger, and that's it. And people don't do it, and it's not just every now and then you'll see it. If I do a 10-minute drive, I'll see 50 people not use their turn signal in a 10-minute drive. So it's not just something that happens occasionally where it's like, oh my God, that person uses a turn signal. That's weird. It's actually weird when people do use a turn signal. If someone is changing lanes and they signal, I'm actually, and many times I've said this out loud, oh my God, they're using a turn signal. That's amazing. And it's crazy that you have to think that. Because think about what a turn signal is for. It's not for you. You know you're changing lanes. You're in your head. You're in your car. You know what you want to do. You know that you are in that at the stop sign, you can go right, left, or straight. You want to go right. You don't need the turn signal to tell yourself that. You know who needs to know that? The car behind you, the car in front of you, the car at the stop sign across the street, who needs to know, should I go straight, but can I go right now? Well, okay, if he's going left, I can't go right now because we'll crash into each other. If he's going right, I can go straight across, it won't be no issue. But I don't know what he's doing. You know why? Because he's not using his fucking turn signal. And I understand the argument people are going to use that, well, sometimes it's not necessary. If you're in a right turn lane, obviously you're turning right. Fair, but if you are going to justify not doing it for then, how do we know you're not going to justify other times not using turn signal? Because of how little effort it uses, I don't buy that as a legitimate reason not to do it, because it takes such little effort to do it anyway. You're causing more accidents or near accidents or just people slamming on their brakes or all the shit, and it would be so simple avoidance by just saying, I'm going left. Now you know I'm going left. So because I have my turn signal on. And, cars are backed up. And the reason why cars are backed up is because one car is trying to get into another lane. So they're holding up. But the people going past you don't know that because you won't have your turn signal on. If you just signaled, so one of the cars eventually will say, you know what? He's signaling. Let's just get this over with. Go ahead. But because you refuse to put your turn signal on, the road gets backed up and backed up and backed up, and you can't communicate other than screaming at the damn window, and it's like, well, what the hell's happening? It's because of you. Use your turn signal. It's good for you. It's good for everybody else. It's good for everyone, and it takes zero effort. Stop being an ass. Back to the show.
Brian, I'm what you would consider a hardliner on the turn signal issue. For you guys who don't know, if you haven't been around the podcast for a while, I'm a hardliner on a lot of stuff. Turn signals are no exception whatsoever. You use your turn signal, and I think this is the part people don't think about a lot, is that, and you do mention it, when you use the turn signal, you're saving yourself from also getting killed from someone else who's not paying attention and who might run right into you, okay? It's one of the most telling things, sort of like, and you guys who've been here a while, you know Brian's talked about the shopping carts, whether you put them back in the shopping complex. It's another one of those small things that tells you so much about the person you're dealing with, whoever it is. It tells you so much that you can't do the simplest thing. But I'll go back. I said I'm a hardliner on this issue. You use a turn signal every time you turn. That's my rule. Okay? I will give an exception for roundabouts or well, if you're leaving a roundabout, no, there's no exception there. But if you're on a curve, for example, you're just kind of curving right or you're curving left, you don't need a signal on, okay? Be realistic. But when you're turning your vehicle, use a turn signal. And here's the reason. Even in those situations where you say, oh, there's no point, I'm in the left lane and I don't need to have my left signal on, it builds a habit, and that habit is very easy for you to do. You have lots of habits, I'm sure. You probably check your phone every 5 seconds, don't you? That's a habit. Well, make a habit that actually helps keep you alive and keeps other people alive as well. It's one of the easiest ways to show consideration for other people, and you just don't see it. You don't see it. And even in the worst situations, obviously you make the example, oh, you're turning right, you don't have to have the right signal on if it's a right-only lane. I'm not even going to buy that justification, because once you do, people can start turning lane or switching lanes on an interstate, for example. Oh, that car was way back there. I had plenty of time. They didn't need my turn signal. And then you get in an accident because they hit you. Well, they weren't expecting you to come over, were they? They didn't know you were coming over. You, again, back to your point, Brian. You knew what you were doing. They did not know. And this is with turn signals or with shopping carts or with literally any of these other what people would consider small issues. There's a much bigger thing happening behind here, which is you are a very selfish, self-centered asshole that only cares about yourself, but you're too dumb to realize that you're hurting yourself in the process.
That's the big point. And if you're someone who's in the left lane, to your example, a left turn lane, and you're not signaling, how does the car behind you know that you're actually going left and not trying to cut right back across into the road you were just on? How do they know that you're not trying to get back, like you made a wrong, you're not supposed to be in the left turn lane, you got to get back on. So you're not actually going left. You're trying to go back on. So you're not signaling right, which would be the way to get back onto the lane. You're not signaling left because you're not going left. So now the person in front of you or approaching you has no idea what you're doing. Again, you know, but the other person doesn't. And the second thing I'm going to add, which is I guess similar to the turn signal thing, when you said it's a small thing that people do but they don't do, and it's a good indication of like where you are as like a person, is when there's a four-way stop and you get behind your second to go, and the car in front of you goes, and you just go anyway and just follow that car.
Oh my God.
Because it's like, well, I waited so long, and I don't want to wait for another 3 other cars to have to go, so I'm just gonna go. You're more important. I get it. You have to go. It's so much more important than everybody else. But that's another example. Yes.
Okay, I just had an amazing idea I want to share with you guys here on the Value Added Podcast. You can let me know if you like this idea at valueadded.zb@gmail.com. But the idea is we should make wheel locks, right, for the steering wheel. And so you have to press the signal to move your wheel all the way. You can move it a little bit, but if you want to move it all the way, you gotta use a signal or it locks up. Obviously, that's a joke. People would be dying all over the place, but that would teach people a lesson, wouldn't it? It certainly would.
Okay. So I believe. Should I go into my example now that I have for equality and equity, or?
Whatever. Okay. Take us away, Brian. I don't remember where we were.
So the example I like using because I make the numbers easy, and I would think if a person is being somewhat good faith, they'd be able to engage with it and go along with it and understand what the point is being made. So let's say there's a company that is hiring 100 positions, the same exact position. So it's not a matter of hierarchy and all that. Just for some reason, they need 100 positions of the same exact role, same exact pay, same exact requirements, right across the board. And so they're taking the best 100 applicants. Of the best 100 applicants, 75 of the best 100 applicants are white. 25 of the best 100 applicants are black. That is not an indication of anything. I'm not implying one race is better than the other for anyone who likes to find ways to get triggered. I'm just using this for the sake of the example. Okay. So, if you lived in a world of equality, you would say those 100 people get the job. the 75 white people and the 25 black people will get the job because they are the best 100 of the applicants for the job. So that's who get hired. If you live in a world of equity, you say the top 50 of that 75 white people get hired, all 25 of the black people, and then the next best 25 black people get hired to make it 50-50. Which means that 50% of those applicants are not actually the best 100. They're actually the next tier, and it's not necessarily the next 50. Who knows how long you're going down to get to the next 25. But you're making the numbers even, which means that 25 of these white people who are qualified for the job, who are more than qualified than 25 of the other black people who got the job, are out of a job now because of their race. Which is the exact thing that many people who scream about equality say that they don't want to happen. But that is what happened if you look at it through an equity lens. So which one would you rather have? Now, of course, the answer that people are going to say if they're being honest is, well, it depends. If the equity allows more black people to get hired, and I'm all about pro-black anything, then you're going to advocate for that. If you are pro-white, and again, then you'll pick it when it's convenient. But if you're pro-black, as an example, and it's something like basketball, the NBA, you're not going to all of a sudden want equity because then, first of all, the league would suck. But suddenly, a lot of the best players in the league who are black are going to be kicked out of the league to allow in for less quality white people to meet your equity standard. But then you won't want that. So, which one would you rather have across the board, equality or equity? That is, obviously, there's a lot more equality and equity can be a little more complex, but that's a simple way I can explain it to people so you can easily see which one is which and make a decision.
I think it's really great that you brought up that example. I'm going to segue. I had an example I wanted to bring up, but I'll bring it up later in the episode. But what you just said segues perfectly into my next talking point, which was about the impacts of equity. Because equity is not this mysterious thing that we're just talking about here on the episode. This is something that's practiced in a lot of places. It's practiced on airlines. It's practiced on in big cities all over the place. It's practiced at many different companies. What you're talking about, Brian, with the 100 people, where you're artificially boosting up others and not others, and you're getting rid of other people but boosting up another group, that's a very real thing that happens. It happens in colleges all over the country. And we do know the result of that because we know that this is a thing. I mentioned affirmative action earlier in the episode. Basically what that is, we only have so many spots open, and that's the truth. The college can't accept everybody. Even if it wanted to, it can't accept everybody. You just don't have the space for it. So they have to be selective on who they allow in. Well, if you're going to allow people who would not qualify to come in, you're automatically probably going to be kicking out people who were qualified to come in. So you might have someone with a I don't know the SAT scores off the top of my head. You might have somebody with a high SAT score and somebody with a medium SAT score, and that person with the medium gets in, the one with the high one doesn't. And that's all for those reasons. And this isn't hypothetical. This is a real thing that actually happens. So what is the result of it? Well, has anyone listening to this episode kind of talked to customers, walked around in public? Have you dealt with any customer service anywhere? Have you dealt with any jobs? Have you dealt as a customer or worked around other people who have college degrees, for example, who don't seem to know anything? I have people that I work around, not going to name names, of course, but people who are not the brightest bulbs on the tree, I could say that much, but yet they have bachelors. I have one person who has a master's, but these are not the most with it kind of folks. And what that tells me is there may have been some DEI action happening behind the scenes. We take a look at airline pilots. How many times, and I watch this on the news every now and again, about the plane crashes that keep happening, air traffic controls messed up, whatever, TSA problems at the TSA, a lot of stuff airport related. Airports are huge on this DEI practice. At least they were back in the last administration, and the results of that are clear. We've seen a steady decline. Whether we're talking customer service or we're talking professionalism or we're talking about societal norms, we've seen a steady decline as we've tried to artificially boost people who are not qualified and not motivated to do the roles that they're being put in. Let the people who want the job get the job. People who want it are going to put the effort in to get it, okay? People who don't care about it, they just want to get something in return, those are the people that are going to do a terrible job, and all of us have to suffer as a result. And that's the key that I want to get across here. equity does not lead to prosperity. It does not lead to happiness as a whole. If we're looking at society as a whole, it leads to a decline in that exact same area. You might think it doesn't, but it does. Those few people, those few selective people might be happy that they've gotten into a role that pays them a lot better, but everyone else has to suffer as a result due to their abysmal customer service or their abysmal skill at whatever job that they were put in. I know it might sound harsh, but you mentioned something else I want to kind of expand on a little bit too, and that's when we look at, who is fighting the most for equality of opportunity, or equity rather, who's fighting the most for it. Yeah, it's usually those advocate groups and that kind of thing. But on an individual level, what you'll often find is it's the benefactor of the equity that's going to fight for it the most. It's always the people at the poor folks who are the angriest at the CEO, because we have such a disparity between where we are and where they are. So we should all be equal. But the moment you start to get past that halfway point, you realize that equality, if we were all living in a communist country where everything's just taken from you and distributed, somewhat distributed, let's be honest here, you would realize that you don't want to advocate for something that's going to make your life worse. So the lazy people want it, the hardworking people don't. I think that's the divide, and it's clear where you should fall.
I've made this point before. I don't know if we're necessarily talking about this topic, but it's related right now. And it goes along with what you just said. If you're in a position where you believe that there's a power struggle in our society, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's sexuality, whether it's religion, no matter what you think it is, and you are, in your mind, part of the group that is not in power, and you advocate to get that power, why would the people in power want that too? Because you want the power, so you understand why they want it. The difference is they have it. They have it. You also want it. So you guys are in agreement there. You guys both want the power, but only one of you can have, one of you can't. And when they have and you don't, your solution is, we'll just give it to me. And if you have it, are you going to give it to them? In which case, the whole thing is pointless. So why would a person who's in power or benefiting from something want to change that if it no longer benefits them and it benefits you? I get why you would want that, but why would the other person want that? And this goes for a lot of different things, including something like DEI or affirmative action. If you were someone who's benefited from that, of course you're going to advocate for that. Why would you not? But if you're someone who doesn't benefit from that, it makes it also complete sense why you wouldn't advocate for it, because you won't benefit. And if you call them selfish, throw it right back at you. As I've said time and time again, always throw it back at them. Because it's very easy to see why whoever benefits from something will want it and the other ones will not. It's very easy to understand that. And as a quick side thing regarding affirmative action or DEI, one thing I hear all the time from people who are defenders of it, I guess, is DEI is not happening in the way that everyone says that it is. What's happening instead is, we'll use race again, black pilots who were qualified originally but weren't being hired because of race are now being hired because of race. So it's not DEI, it's just they're getting what they deserved all along. They're getting equality, basically. Okay. I think I made this point in another podcast episode as well. If that is what's happening, that's not DEI. So that is not the problem. And I don't think that's what anybody who's complaining about DEI is talking about. They're not talking about somebody who was qualified to be a pilot, but somehow was not given that role because of their race. 99.9% of people in this country would say, give that person a job. They're qualified to be a pilot. Who gives a shit about their race? Hire them. Give them the job. But that's not what people are complaining about. What people are upset about is there's a qualified pilot and a either qualified but not as much qualified pilot, or someone who's not qualified at all as a pilot. But because they want to make racial quotas match, they give this person down here the job anyway, just so they can say, oh, look how racially sensitive we are, how racially equal we are, we're hiring all these black pilots. But the people that you're skipping over because of that are more qualified, and you're eliminating that entirely. That is what most people are complaining about when it comes to DEI. That is a legitimate complaint. The point that you're making as a defense is not a valid complaint because it's not DEI. It's something totally different, but you're pretending that it is.
It's also super hard to prove, if we're being honest. A lot of times when you hear stuff like this, it's allegations, but where exactly does the proof come in? You say you didn't get hired, but you're qualified. Qualified to whose standards? Qualified to the job standards? And by the way, two people can be both qualified for a job and one selected because they talk better or they were able to impress the people better. You know, we think about this as just qualifications. There's more to it than that. There really is. Any job you go into, any interview you have, can you make an impact on the person you're talking to? Can you make them feel comfortable? Can you make them feel welcome? There's a lot of human psychology that goes into interviews that go beyond just what's on your application. That's a very, very true thing. And it's not accounted for at all when it comes to these kind of equations. So I'm not going to, you want to play the devil's advocate. You want to play the game that's being presented here. You hear this so often, these claims that are made that are just wildly outrageous with no basis whatsoever. No, we're not just going to accept that blindly. If you want to show that racism exists, you actually have to prove it, and it's a hard thing to prove. Especially because, in my own opinion, I don't think that it's happening to the degree that people say it happens. I know that I'm not an idiot. I understand everyone has their own preferences and prejudices. That's a real thing. It will always exist. Don't get me wrong. This will always exist. And prejudices don't just extend to race. They extend to literally everything. You might not like people who are short, or you might not like people who are tall,
or people who wear black beanies.
Right, or exactly. And that's not a fair one to exclude, but you're entitled to that opinion. That's fine. Anyway, so I want to transition to the point I was going to bring up earlier, which is about minimum wage arguments that you hear a lot, because of course that goes right into this conversation with regards to equity and equality of outcome, really. And this is where I want to make a point, and that's, when they say I'm going to work at McDonald's and I want to be paid as much as the person who works in accounting because I want to be able to afford the house that the person in accounting has, or I can't afford a house at all right now on minimum wage in my area for whatever reason, so I need to be paid as much as my manager, for example, so I can afford a house in the area that I live. That again goes. You're looking for the equal outcome without the equal effort, and I think one of the things that falls apart a lot in these arguments that people try to make is the effort that's put in to be a manager is not the same as the effort you put in to be a cook. You can say one is harder than the other. I don't really care which one you say, but the reality is being a manager is a more difficult job. Therefore, you get more pay. I was talking to my son about this the other day. He was asking why doctors get paid so much, and I said, "Well, they have a very challenging job, don't they, Brian?" I mean, I don't think I could be a doctor. I don't think I could. I think it's
not just difficult in terms of the work involved. It also takes a lot of schooling, not necessarily medical school, but just it's a very specialized thing. You can't just wake up one day and just go into the operating room and start operating. It takes a lot of studying and a lot of practice and so on and so forth.
And the question is, are you willing to put forth that investment of your time, your energy, your sleepless nights? Are you willing to put forth that effort to get the result that you want? Now, a lot of people aren't. The people advocating for minimum wage to be higher, these people are not putting in the effort to change their lives, to get the nice house, to get what the accountant is making, okay? Because you can do it. And that's the beauty of the world that we live in. That's the beauty of America, is that you have the opportunity to do so. You just have to better yourself. And I know I can give different examples like this all day, but back to you, Brian.
The minimum wage thing is so obvious. The people who advocate for it, why they're advocating for it. They may fluff it up and say that like people deserve a livable wage and all that, but many times I can't say all, 'cause I'm not in everybody's head, but many times the person saying that is saying that because I make minimum wage and I want to make more money. That's all. That's all their motivation.
Without more effort.
Right, without more effort. That's all their motivation is. So a question I've asked before, on the podcast and off, when this conversation has come up, is a employer obligated to pay you in a way that where you can have a certain standard of living? Any kind of standard of living. Are they required to pay you a certain amount, determine a certain amount that people need to live a certain life? Is an employer required to pay you that? To me, the answer is absolutely not. They're not required to pay you any amount other than what's decided by law, because really what they are obligated to pay you is whatever you and the people who work in the same role as you are willing to work for. And if you think that that's not how it's happening, it kind of is. Because if you are working at Walmart as a cashier and they pay $8 an hour, they're not, but let's just say that they are, and you take the job, you are agreeing to that pay rate. That pay rate. If you don't want $8 an hour, but you accept it anyway, why would Walmart give you more? Just because you want it? But you agreed to 8. Why would I pay you 15 when you're willing to work for 8? If every cashier decided, fuck this, I'm not working for $8 an hour, we're not working this job at all, they have no cashiers, they have to raise the rate to get people to work. It's a supply and demand kind of thing that I talked about with customers a lot too. It's a pretty easy thing to understand, but it gets lost because it's all about what benefits me. The other thing I want to point out, and we talked about this as well in a previous episode, is if you live in a world now where everyone basically makes the same amount of money, regardless of the role, I think people don't think about what impact that has on the roles that are available in society. If you get paid the same amount to be a cook at McDonald's as you are to be a doctor, there's going to be a lot of cooks at McDonald's, there's not going to be a lot of doctors.
Correct.
Why would there be? It takes zero schooling, not zero effort, but very little effort. You don't have to. It's not something you have to take home 24/7. You're not always on call. It's not a life or death situation for the most part, unless you cook the food bad, I guess. But it's just one of those things it's for the most part, especially if you get good at it, it can be a very mindless job. You can do it while you're talking to your friend about the Super Bowl. It's a much less stressful job than being a doctor, and yet you get paid the same rate. I think people who advocate for this just assume that we're still going to have the same amount of doctors, the same amount of lawyers, the same amount of police officers and firefighters and all these people, EMTs, and they're just going to do the job anyway just because that's just how the world's going to work. It's ridiculous to think that. So there has to come a point where you have to have some kind of incentive to do certain jobs that other people that are important, that other people don't want to do, and a pay scale is one way to do that. And if you don't want the minimum wage job that you get at a certain company, go to a different company, or you and everyone else who works for that job don't work in that role anymore, and the company will have to respond. But don't just throw your hands up and say, I want $25 an hour because I want to be able to afford a 3-bedroom, 2-balcony apartment in the middle of downtown that I can live by myself. Employer is not required to give you that just because you want it.
Yeah, I have so many things I want to say. I'm probably going to forget half of them before I finish my sentence. But one, employers are definitely not. I hate the idea of minimum wage, honestly, in general. I think that if you're willing to work for less money, that you should be allowed to. I think that if that was the case, you would get rid of some of this immigration problem that we have, where you're getting illegal immigrants who are willing to work for a certain rate that Americans aren't, supposedly. This is what I supposedly hear. And how would you mitigate that? Well, if there was no minimum wage and you know that there's people in your area willing to work for it, well, there you go. Doesn't matter whether at that point you're not required to pay somebody a minimum amount to get them to do really what's a minimum job.
It's crazy, by the way, that people advocate for that on pro-immigration side about the, they're willing to do the jobs that other people not willing to do for cheaper, as if they're not advocating for like some kind of slave labor. And,
yeah, right.
And they're not being the racist. Yeah.
Exactly. The other thing I wanted to say was about, you made me think when you were talking to just now, Brian, you made me think about the healthcare industry and the idea of universal healthcare and the requirement of doctors to be on call for your every woman, every need. We need to have an episode just about universal healthcare. I think that would be an interesting episode because I think I have some stuff I could say just about that topic alone. Yeah, there's the expectation of what you're supposed to get with minimal effort is really getting to a point, and it's been getting to a point where it's beyond irritating. I could say this as someone who doesn't make minimum wage, not that I make that much more than it, but I don't make minimum wage. The people advocating for minimum wage actually hurt. I think, in my opinion, I think they hurt society a lot more than they do to benefit anything. First of all, again, going back to the point, you don't make a lot of contribution to society in a minimum wage role. You don't. Your contribution is probably very minimal, whatever your contribution is. For the other people who are in the regular working field, here's what happens when minimum wage goes up. For anyone who doesn't understand, it goes from $14 to $15 an hour. But if you're at $25, do you think that your employer sees, oh, minimum wage went up $1. Here, let me increase your pay by the mathematical proportion of what their increase is? No. That doesn't happen. They don't even go as far to say, oh, they got $1 extra, let's give you $1 extra. No, that doesn't happen either. your rate will probably stay the same. The company might do some kind of 5%, 10% increase to keep up with the economy or something at the end of the year, but it doesn't apply across the board. So for all the people, and I remember hearing about this too, because I mean, I've worked a lot of jobs. I could be standing next to someone who's been with the company for 25 years or something. It's an old guy who's been here forever, and he's making a certain rate. And he'll just pull me aside and he'll complain, and he'll say this, I started at this rate, I'm making this now. They got these guys brand new, 16 years old, starting here, and they're making $1.50 less than I am. And I've been here for 25 years. How do you think those people feel who invested their life and their hard-earned, their effort into a job, and they're not seeing the rewards of that through a gap in pay, a sizable gap in pay to illustrate that time and investment they've put in? I've been in that situation to some degree, and yeah, it can be irritating, even more so when someone just gets hired at a higher rate than you or the exact same rate you're at, and they have no experience whatsoever. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, why am I here? So these are some of the hidden things that people don't talk about very much.
And the other thing that happens with that is people make this mistake when it comes to a lot of things. They seem to advocate for things where everything else, something changes and everything else stays the same, or vice versa. Sometimes they advocate for everything else changing, but you stay the same. But in this case, what they're advocating for is that they're advocating for a change in minimum wage, and everything else around stays the same as it was. So, so in the case of like the minimum wage, that they somehow just make more money, but the prices aren't going to go up. The companies are going to keep the same work that they had before, the same number of workers, rather than saying, okay, now our cost of labor just went up because everyone's making more. We need to keep that a certain number, so we got to cut certain people because we need to make this labor number. So now people who were making minimum wage now are not making zero because they got let go. These things aren't going to happen though. In your mind,
hours getting cut too,
right? Yeah, these things aren't going to happen. What's getting cut?
Hours.
Oh, hours.
Like how many hours you have at work?
Well, that's another thing. But these things aren't going to happen. No, I'm going to get a pay rate increase, but the prices of everything else are going to stay the same, which means that now my purchasing power goes up. That's going to stay the same. I'm still going to have the job. Everyone else around me is still going to have their job, and we're all going to have the same number of hours. It's just, that's all going to happen right across the board. That's not how businesses work. That's not how economy works. That's not how money works. That's not how math works. But people just pretend that it does to make it sound like something that actually is practical, but it's not.
Yeah, there are a lot of people living in fantasy worlds. There just really is. The sheer lack of perspective, and I'm beyond sick of it. I'm just sick of it. I see it all the time, and it's beyond irritating. But look, I think that's a good stopping point for this episode. We got some good points across. If you're also irritated by this fiasco of equity, please let us know at valueadded.cb@gmail.com. If you have any questions or comments about the episode that you want to share, you can do so, of course, at that email. Interact with the comment section here on Spotify or on YouTube. And we upload every Friday, so we have a lot of new content coming out for you guys. It's going to be really great. You have any closing thoughts, Brian? I know I kind of sprung the outro on you there pretty quick.
No, I saw it coming. There's probably a lot more both of us can say, but I think we covered the main points that we wanted to cover. Hopefully you guys understood at least a little bit that there's a difference between equality and equity. It's a significant difference, and when people advocate for one over the other, make sure you actually sift through what they're saying to understand what they're actually advocating for. When they say they're advocating for equality, are they? Or are they advocating for equity and they're calling it equality because they think it sounds better? That's a big difference in terms of what they're saying and what they mean.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Good closing thoughts. Well, guys, thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Ciao.